So Bowser's Fury is out today, and I guess Super Mario 3D World as well, but it's really Bowser's Fury that I want to focus on here, because this is a brand new 3D Mario adventure that's just included as part of 3D World on Nintendo Switch, and it's kind of awesome, at least to me. Tris, you just posted a review of it, so I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts on that. But we also have Chris and Joey here to give their thoughts as well, because pretty much the entire crew here has played this game and almost entirely beat it. So there's a lot for us to discuss here and see, I think, really whether this could be the future of 3D Mario games. There's a lot of interesting ideas on display here. I'm curious to see what everyone thought of them. Curious like a cat, I guess. Get it? Anyways, Tris, you reviewed it. What do you think of Bowser's Fury in a nutshell?
So, in a nutshell, not to spoil my review too much, because I'm sure we'll just link to it in the description and in the video, but I really enjoyed it, which was more than I expected. I expected to enjoy it. Like, I was curious about it. When they announced it, okay, new Mario adventure, paired with 3D World. Sounds great. I'm curious what it'll be like. And I was surprised just how much I ended up really liking it. They did a lot that I feel should absolutely be sort of the framework for 3D Mario going forward. And as I touched upon a little bit in the review, and Andre, you and I had talked about while I was writing that review, this actually kind of delivered on the promise that Sunshine had back almost 20 years ago now of connected, like, open world. You know, back in Sunshine, you could see Peanut Park, the theme park, from basically everywhere, but you couldn't necessarily go to it. You could see all the areas of the game took place in a closer area, in one bigger island. And now, with Bowser's Fury, it really delivers on that promise. You can go pretty much anywhere you can see, as long as it's not, like, out in the horizon, surrounded by all the black goop.
Right. Yeah, instead of being an illusion, you actually have a fully connected world this time, and that's something that I didn't know I wanted from Mario. But yeah, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Chris, what did you end up thinking of Bowser's Fury?
Yeah, I'm with Tris. Honestly, I really liked it. I'm a huge 3D Mario fan, but even with that, I had high expectations, but my expectations weren't super high going in, just because this was, I guess you could say, bundled with 3D World. It's kind of two games in one, so I already knew we were getting that, and 3D World is a great game, so I didn't really know what to expect from Bowser's Fury, and it didn't have the pressure of being the next big 3D Mario game,
right.
Even though that's sort of what it is. It's a miniature version of that,
Yeah.
And I think that really helped its case, because I think a lot of people are pretty pleasantly surprised by it, and it's similar to, it's sort of like a fully realized version of Sunshine in a lot of ways, and it's similar to Odyssey 2, but or Odyssey as well, not Odyssey 2. There is no Odyssey 2 yet. I wish. But it's still pretty different from anything we've seen before with the whole Fury Bowser cycle, and that changes a lot about the game, and I just really appreciate all of the experimental aspects of this, and I hope maybe not specifically what Bowser's Fury is, but at least the experimentation behind it, trying new things with 3D Mario. I hope that really, inspires and plays into the future of the series.
Yeah, it really worked out that I think expectations weren't super high, I think, for Bowser's Fury, and maybe, now I wonder if Nintendo purposefully made the Mario and Luigi spin-off things they added in the remakes, the Bowser side stories or whatever, and they purposely made those as disappointing as possible, so we'd go into this game thinking it would be along those lines. But how about you, Joey? What did you end up thinking? Because you're obviously the biggest Mario fan among us. What did you think of Bowser's Fury?
Am I though? But yeah. So I enjoyed it as well. I wouldn't say I loved it as much as Tris and Chris. I feel like this is kind of a proof of concept idea for like the future of 3D Mario, because the world is. I do like the whole interconnected world aspect of it, but at the same time, the world isn't that huge. It's mostly islands. I would love to see this like expanded upon in future Mario games, and maybe that's why they made it, to kind of just get that idea out there and see how well it sticks. And I think it sticks pretty well for the most part. I do think it is kind of silly though that like the second you leave like an area and then come back, it's like, oh, the lighthouse is damaged again. Gotta do something else. But I feel like they could have found a way to make that a little less awkward in a sense. Kind of just like, oh, I'm leaving, coming back right away. There's some new threat that I got to work on. But But other than that, I do think it is a really cool idea, and yeah, it is enjoyable. And at first I thought it's only going to be the first area, and that's all of Bowser's Fury. Nope, more areas unlocked,
Yes.
and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
awesome. This is awesome.
Yeah, you said a lot there that I agree with. It does kind of feel like a proof of concept, showing if you can kind of make the more 2D like mechanics, the 3D land, the 3D world work in the 3D space, with with no health meter like the other 3D games, with proper power ups that aren't context dependent like in Odyssey or Mario Galaxy. And a more kind of like straightforward linear level design when it comes to some of these specific islands. And also, you are totally right about the mechanic of when you leave an island and then come back, you get a new objective. That completely threw me off. I stayed on the same island for a while trying to find how to do the other catch signs. I'm like, nothing is here. What the heck do I do? So I just left and then came back later. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Now it's a thing.
It was most apparent with the Coliseum where you fight Boom Boom and Pom Pom.
Yep.
Because when you physically leave the area, you can turn around and watch it rise another level higher.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. I just realized it was the same building structure. And what's funny too, I think Joe was kind of touching on this. Like the world itself, when I was exploring it without using the map, it felt huge. Like maybe it's because none of the islands or some of the islands aren't especially recognizable from a distance. But I felt like I was getting lost and finding new things constantly. Then you look at the map, it's it's really not that complicated. There's not all that much going on here, and it does kind of feel like they just took levels from 3D Land or 3D World, just plopped them in an ocean and kind of called it a day. But despite all of this, despite how negative that may have sounded, I loved it. I loved this game. Yeah. I had a blast the entire time through, and I think Nintendo kind of killed it. Even if it's a proof of concept, it doesn't really feel like one. Yeah, it's a 2.5 hour adventure. That is short by Mario standards, but it totally worked for what this experience is, and I loved everything about it, whether it's having power-ups in the proper 3D space, as I said earlier, or having a kind of grander focus on these more linear level designs while still having the openness of a 3D space. And then you layer on top of all this, well, first off, the amazing music. The music is so good.
Yeah,
I think Wind Waker might have just been topped when it comes to ocean themes, because Plessy's music here is so perfect. But then you layer on top of all this the Bowser encounters, where you have Fury Bowser coming out, and it just changes everything when you're normal sized, where now you're trying to complete the objective you were already, but now you have to deal with Bowser's, nonsense, like fireballs and fire breath, and it's just it looks intense, and it's really epic feeling. And then of course you have the Giga fights, where you actually fight him as a giant-sized cat Mario, and those are fun. I think I found those a little underwhelming, like you did in your review, Triss. But they were still cool and a fun way to mix up the gameplay. But yeah, I overall loved this game.
Speaking of Bowser's Fury, though, speaking of the Fury Bowser, I think that's probably the worst part of the game, though. Not him himself, but having to wait for him if you don't own a Bowser amiibo. I really think that's just not a great design, having to keep waiting for him in order to get those Fury blocks. Right. I literally had to just my wife got me a little snack while I waited for for Fury Bowser to show up. It's just come on, I don't own a Bowser amiibo, and not everyone does. I really think it's kind of just not smart to make make him show up behind an amiibo. You have to buy it.
I think the best way to handle that would have been if those were ways to get shortcuts. Kind of like what you have in the... I think it's the third area, the lava area, where I believe it's a shortcut to have him destroy part of, the giant dam with the Fury blocks to be able to swim around more. If they all worked like that, where it was more of a shortcut to the shine, I think that would be a lot better.
Yeah.
Just because, I don't know, maybe instead, if you didn't have Fury Bowser roaming around, you would instead have to enter a pipe and do almost like what you had in Odyssey when you go in certain doors and you had a whole little platforming level to do to get to the reward at the end. Maybe you would have to do that to reach what's behind those Fury blocks. And I think that would have helped pace it a little bit better there, just so instead of waiting, people could do something else to get the shine. Yeah.
Especially because the time you have to wait seems to vary, and I don't know what that's based on. The amount of time Bowser takes to surface changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not based on your progress through the game, I noticed. Because when I was doing the post-game, trying to finish 100%ing, there were times where Bowser would come out after, and I started to time it. There were times where Bowser would come out after a minute and a half. The longest I had to wait was 7.5 minutes, where he didn't even start to rise up until after 3 minutes had passed.
Right.
And then there was a different time where right after I beat him, he was already up and glowing orange. And I don't understand why.
I think I had that too. I think
Totally.
I finished a fight, then he immediately popped back up again.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's really strange. It's confusing, and you don't know when exactly it happens or what the system is, or if there even is a system, if it's just randomized. I was stuck on a platforming mission that I kept dying on. I was having a really hard time. It was one of the ones where you have to return the key to the shrine in the Roiler something. I forgot what it's called. And yeah, I kept dying, and I felt like the more I died, like sometimes I would come back to life, and then Bowser would immediately rise, and it's weird. So it's like his cycle doesn't reset if you die. Like he goes back to the ground. I think he stays where he was, so you can come right back to life, and then boom, there he is. It's strange.
Surprise!
Also, yeah. Also, Joey, to your point earlier, that's a great point about the amiibo. And then on the flip side, though, sometimes it kind of seemed like Fury Bowser would show up at the least convenient times. Like if I'm in the middle of a really tight platforming challenge, and then suddenly it just starts raining, and it's like, oh no,
He knows.
why now? It's like in Breath of the Wild when it starts
Yeah, I was
raining
just
while
about
you're
to say
climbing the
that.
mountain.
Yes.
It's like that.
Oh my
yeah.
god, I didn't even think about that. It actually reminded me, no, the range comparison is great. Actually, because like in Breath of the Wild, it makes everything tougher. In fact, I was talking to one of my friends last night who purposely likes platforming when Bowser's out because it just makes it that much more difficult. But before that, the whole Bowser thing reminded me a bit of Majora's Mask, where you can see like the moon like coming closer and closer.
yes.
Bowser felt a little bit like that, just on a much tighter time schedule and a much softer pressure because the game doesn't end when when he appears. So.
It is
That's
really
true.
cool how you can peek and actually see how high up he is, like how close he is to breaking free of his shell or whatever. That's a really cool touch. He's actually always there looming over.
I think the scariest thing was always I kept running into the issue of I would be on Plessy swimming around when Bowser appears, and when he appears, he lands near you. The problem for me was he kept landing right in front of me. So Plessy would just ram into like Bowser's shin, and I would take damage. And it would be kind of terrifying because that's when you realize just how massive he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. That's something they do that's really well done. It's just kind of scale of everything. Like with Bowser's nearly constant presence in the world in some way. Like it really gives like a sense of scale to what's already a big world, and you feel like he's towering over you. So when you grow as big as him, it kind of feels like oh man, this is gonna be awesome. And then the fights themselves actually aren't quite as awesome. But yeah. So what do we think? What do we think is wrong with the Giga fights? Like I mean, I don't think they're bad. I just don't think they're quite as fun as I was hoping.
I think they're too fast. It's too easy to cheese them.
Yeah.
Like for example, when the fact that you can throw his spikes back at him, you can just kind of get him stuck in a loop of that. Because after ground pounding him, so let me back up a little bit. So after I think like a phase or two, he'll start doing this thing where he'll spin around and launch spikes out. Kind of like it's basically the same thing that become platforms when you're normal sized, but when you're big, you can pick those up and throw them at him. And I love that mechanic. That's like that's like that reminds me of like the Godzilla games, for example. But what I don't like about it is after you hit him with that and then you ground pound him, you get sent backwards right to where you were before. Or for the most part, which means you could just pick up another one and throw it at him again. And most times with Fury Bowser, you only really have to ground pound him like 1 or 2 or 3 times before he's done. So if you just get him stuck in that loop, it gets a little too fast. And I almost wish it had the engagement and cycles of his boss fights in Odyssey, where there was a lot more going on. You had to wait for certain openings. It's a little too easy to make him vulnerable, basically, and get your hits in.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. It just doesn't feel like for as grand as the battle set piece seems to be, like the setting with you towering over everything. Yeah, it just goes by too quick. It just kind of feels like, you know, a normal boss battle. Like, they do slow you down, and they kind of limit your moveset to make it feel like you're bigger and, you know, making this larger impact, which is cool. But yeah, at the same time, it kind of like just simplifies everything, I think, and that's maybe part of the problem, especially when you add in the fact that you can just throw the pillars at him, which I didn't even realize at first, and once I did, I ended up making it far easier. And I think, too, as you said, like the health or the fact that the battle just ends as quickly as it does, kind of doesn't feel like the climax we were expecting from all the build-up getting to that point, because you probably battle him, what, 4 or 5 times in the game? 6, maybe? So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, there's 2 things. One, the slowness of the movement really just made it just not that fun to play these fights. Like when Mario jumps, whenever you land, Mario kind of stops. He has to kind of land his jump and then start walking again, just because he's so big and slow and towering over everything. And I think that's cool, but it just doesn't make it that fun to play from a gameplay perspective. Like, just to control Mario and, like, you know, land these hits on Bowser, it's just a little too slow for me to kind of keep my engagement. And then the second thing, what was the second thing? Oh yeah, and then also, I thought Fury Bowser had some pretty cool attacks, like how he would, I think this only happened in the last few fights, maybe he did it more often, but he would roll these balls, almost like soccer balls, I guess, and you could kick them back at him, and then they would explode and do some damage. But he didn't do that very often, and I never actually landed a single hit on him with that. It always just reverted to the same attacks that were the easiest to land. So maybe it's a matter of doing more of those unique attacks, like kind of spreading them apart so he's not so repetitive. But yeah, it definitely was pretty underwhelming. Like, it seems like what they were going for was that to be the most exciting, memorable part of this game. But when I think about Bowser's Fury from now on, now that I've played it, the first thing that comes to mind isn't really going to be those battles. It's just going to be running around and exploring the world.
Totally. I'm right there with you. I think that actually is the highlight. And it's so interesting because in my 3D World review, 7 years ago now, I think I mentioned that, those games, despite, even though they are in 3D, they basically have the mechanics of a 2D game, just in a 3D space. But now I feel like Bowser's Fury finally, like, I say finally, I don't mean that as an insult. It just feels like it kind of did that concept even better. Like, these are 2D mechanics now in a proper full 3D space, like we've seen from other Mario 3D games. Like, this feels like the official, or like kind of like the end game of the crossover here. And it makes me so curious to see where they go in the future with it, because I really did love how it worked here. I didn't realize how much I missed having power-ups, because we've never had them in a 3D space before, besides the context-sensitive ones I mentioned, or they'd have a time limit or something. Whereas here, you can carry a power-up from one island to another, assuming you don't lose it, or you can equip it using Bowser Jr., which, by the way, I think I might carry a little too many of them. But I almost always had cat suits or raccoon suits. But it was so fun, though, being able to explore the world in this variety of ways, without being stuck with the one that the developer wanted to use in that one specific context. So I really enjoyed that. Like, I really just enjoyed having kind of like the simplicity of the power-up system, which also adds some complexity at the same time in this large 3D space.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what their goals are for the next 3D Mario games, or if they want to kind of make this gameplay style like a spin-off, in a sense. Because I remember when 3D World was announced, and I was just kind of annoyed because I wanted a 3D Mario experience like what Mario Odyssey turned out to be, pretty much. So now that Odyssey has basically satiated my palate for that. And this kind of, in a sense, too, because we've been waiting how many years for the next 3D Mario game. This is kind of like a little appetizer for what's to come next, whether that is Odyssey 2 or something brand new. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, did this start out as like maybe Mario Odyssey DLC, but then they decided, hey, let's stick it into a 3D World Switch port? Or did it start out like maybe a new 3D Mario game, and they decided to put it in 3D World to test the waters? There's a whole lot of speculation I can even think of, and like, of course, depending on the reception of Bowser's Fury, which has been above excellent, I would say, it kind of makes me think, like, what more can we see from this gameplay style in the future?
Well, I actually think, and this is my personal theory, we don't know anything here, and I don't know how many people have been talking about this, but I think Bowser's Fury might have started as the next game in the 3D Land World kind of series. So they started by porting 3D World and, getting that working and then seeing what more could they do. But then they thought about it and decided, well, we have the normal 3D world, so let's go with that, and then let's experiment with this to see what people think if this really would be the next proper big step. Because it really does feel like the perfect fusion between the 3D world kind of games and the bigger 3D Marios like we have in 3D All-Stars. And I think that's what that series needs to do to move forward and become more interesting without running into the new Super Mario Bros. XXXXXX version. Like, whatever version of New Super Mario Bros. Like, without becoming that, I think this is the perfect way to do that. And I think this might have started as a way to kind of see where they can take that specific side of the series. Because when you're playing it, as much as it does feel like a fusion between these two kinds of Mario games, it does still play, in terms of like controls and motions, more like a 3D world. Like, when my fiance was checking it out, one of the first things he mentioned was he kept trying to do the stylish levels of momentum movement from Odyssey, and he was getting a little upset that he couldn't.
Yeah, I kept trying to do a triple jump, and it wouldn't let me, and that made me upset.
Yes!
Yep.
Oh, I wanted the triple jump so bad!
Right?
That's exactly what I meant too, yeah.
Or like the roll. The roll doesn't give you momentum in the way it does in Odyssey.
Yep.
Like rolling,
it almost
or
slows
even
you
the
down,
long
which
jump.
is weird.
Well, sort of like I said about the Fury Bowser fights, Mario kind of, sometimes with specific moves, he'll like stop for a brief period when he lands instead of just keeping that momentum going, and it just like frustrates me so much because Odyssey, it's so fast and it's so fluid. But I think that's better for the 3D world style of levels and the tighter platforming, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just it is definitely more. I was expecting it to be more of a blend of the two. It definitely does feel like there's a lot more 3D world inspiration here.
I actually just booted up 3D World in the game this morning just to play through some of it again and for comparison's sake. And yeah, the controls are absolutely very similar, but it reminds me a little bit of like a little bit of Resident Evil 4 with how those controls are very similar to the previous games, but they move the camera behind the character.
Yeah.
And it kind of changed entirely how it felt. And that's kind of how I felt here. That even though the controls are largely identical, they still feel quite a bit different. But I also agree that the movement felt a little odd compared to some of the other 3D Marios. I really did like the fluidity of like Mario Odyssey and the flexibility you had there. But I didn't mind the more limited take on it in this case with Bowser's Fury. But the one thing I still do not like, period, and I will forever stand by this, is you don't need a run button if you have a control stick. It just doesn't feel right to me. And I think you can almost play this game without using it, at least a fair amount of the time. But yeah, especially with, I never liked 3D World's like boost mechanic where after you run for a moment, like you get a speed boost. It just feels really arbitrary to me. So I wish they had the kind of momentum system of the other 3D Mario games.
Yeah, there definitely are, I think, a few kind of small issues with the movement. Like, for example, with the run button, pressing Y to run, that becomes a little tricky when you're carrying objects like the keys or the cats. Because because that's the same button to pick them up, but it's also the button to throw them. So if you're already holding Y while you run up to them, you pick them up and you're still running fast. But if you just press Y and let go, you're still holding them, but now you're walking slow and you can't run fast. It's just like a weird little thing. And also, I love the power-ups being in here, but they also get a little tough with the controls. Like, for example, with Tanuki Mario, you can't dive. That becomes like a spin with your tail. And that caused me to fall off some pretty high ledges a few times because I was expecting to dive and get that forward momentum, but I forgot I was Tanuki Mario and he just kind of spun around and then I fell to my doom. So yeah, there are definitely a few little things that are kind of strange. Also, did anyone notice whenever you get a speed boost from, I forget what they're called, the pads that you can run across and then it makes you run really fast. If you jump after that, or if you land on something and you let go of the control stick, you keep running forward.
Yeah.
Did anyone else notice that?
I did not. No.
I did, and I think I only realized it because I think the original 3D World did that. At the very least, it did it in Champions Road. because I remember
right.
dying to that mechanic so much.
Okay, if that was already there, that makes sense. I wasn't sure if it was yeah.
It just feels weird in
definitely
a 3D
jumped out to me.
space, is what it is.
It's different in the 3D space, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, talking about the speed pads reminded me that I think this almost could be a template for how Sonic could work in 3D. Like, just give you this large open space where you can run from, region to region, and each region is like its own, like, largely self-contained, platforming segment. And I think it'll be a good way to mix, like, the fast and slow-paced nature of Sonic with, like, the platforming, and, yeah, just give you these... Yeah, I don't know. I think that could really work. I hope Sega's taking lessons from this.
Sonic team, if you're watching this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We haven't really touched on one kind of surprising thing about this game, too, and that's the fact you're working with Bowser Jr. You're working with the enemy in this game in order to stop Fury Bowser. And that's something, correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't really, I'm sure I think we have seen this since. It reminds me most specifically of Mario RPG, where you team up with Bowser in that game. I guess we've seen elements of that since, a little bit like in Bowser's Inside Story, but I don't think we've ever seen it in the platforming game. So that's definitely something that's a little unusual. Working with one of your villains, and it's great. Like, I really like Bowser. It's so funny. I've done a 180 on this guy. I used to think he was kind of a lazy character, especially because I missed the Koopalings at that point in time, and it felt like he was this weird replacement for them. But I kind of like the guy now. There's just something endearing. I think they've done a good job building him up as a character over the years. And I love, as Tris mentioned in the review, how Bowser Jr. tells a story or the situation through the panels he drew or the little signboards he drew.
They've done a lot to really build up his personality and like what he is as a character, instead of just looking for Mama Peach or Little Bowser. Like they've actually fleshed out his character a lot more over the years. So I also really appreciate him more as a character. And also, Andre, how can you talk about not let me rephrase that. How can you talk about platformers where you get to play as villains when Super Paper Mario was a platformer?
That's a good point.
And had Bowser. And New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe has Nabbit.
Nabbit, I don't know what Nabbit is. No one knows what Nabbit really is.
Yeah,
I know.
He's
I
an
know.
anti-hero.
I'm mostly just messing around with both of these answers.
I do kind of wish, like in Bowser Jr.'s case, I still feel like the dialogue he's given is still pretty much just like matter of fact sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's weird how the game kind of goes, but it looks like Bowser Jr. wants to say something. I'm like, just say it.
I know. I was going to say that too. I wrote that down. I was like, this is like the 5th time the game has told me it looks like Bowser Jr. wants to say something when the camera is on him and it's clear he's talking.
That's a great point. That's a little weird.
Seriously.
It's almost like they're trying to tailor that part to kids so it's clear what's happening. But at the same time, like this speaks, to I think a kind of grander perspective on the game as a whole. But I think this is definitely more for kind of older Mario fan, like a slightly older demographic than I think than 3D World for sure. Just because like Bowser's pretty terrifying. When I was little, I would not want to play this game. I would be way too scared, And so when you get those little things, like it looks like Bowser Jr. has something to say, it's like, okay, come on.
You add in how imposing Fury Bowser is, on top of how difficult the platforming can be in general, not even counting when Fury Bowser's roaming around.
It's just tough.
Yeah, it's not an easy game. So you're kind of right. It does feel like it's almost skewing a little bit older with the gameplay, whereas the presentation is, pretty typical, but even skewing a little bit younger than it seems like they may typically be.
I almost feel like if they didn't have the UI prompt for it, and they just had him do the whole thing with the paintings and Mario's reaction, that would have worked. Like, no UI prompts, nothing, saying, it looks like Bowser Jr. wants to talk, or the weird UI prompt where it has in quotes what he's saying, almost as if a narrator's reading it out. Like, if they didn't have any of that, I think it actually would have worked perfectly fine. The few things where, the Giga Bell's saying these things, I think those also could have worked, like the word bubbles popping up, like when you first approach Bowser Jr. and it's just this giant help as he runs in circles. Like, it could have worked like that too, I think.
It's true. It's a good point. It reminds me of like the story in Super Mario 3D Land. Like, I don't think there's any dialogue in that, but they tell it through those images, like those like little postcards that Mario gets of like Bowser on the airship with Peach or whatever.
Yeah.
Just kind of like showing off what he's doing, and it tells the story pretty clearly that way. I thought they were going to do that with Bowser Jr.'s painting too. Just kind of he paints what he's trying to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you guys have any thoughts about the game itself? Anything else we haven't brought up yet, whether presentation or story or gameplay-wise, that you want to touch on?
Just that I hope this isn't the last we see of something like this, because I think they have something really interesting here.
Yeah.
Yep.
I fully
Definitely.
agree. Like, I hope this is kind of a glimpse into what the future of 3D Mario could be. Not necessarily the entire future, but, I think this is a very interesting direction that I would never... I don't think I ever, really thought about, at least not recently. It felt like the 3D Marios are very much their own thing. The 2D Marios were pretty much, self-contained as well. And then you had the kind of weird semi-bridge with 3D Land and 3D World. But like I said earlier, this kind of feels like the proper fusion between the two. And I think they could go even... Yeah, I think they could go even farther with this idea. And I'd love to see what else, what other concepts they could have. Like, for instance, you could broaden it. I mean, in this case, like Sunshine, it's kind of dedicated to a single theme, like an ocean and these kind of, these islands that aren't particularly eclectic. They all feel a little similar in terms of, like, thematics. But you could have, like, a giant desert, grassland. Like, you could have the typical Mario themes and just blow it out on a scale like this. And maybe you could have, like, different vehicles or different characters you ride in those cases. Kind of like we already saw in Odyssey. But it's so interesting because, like, in some cases, like, this game did remind me of Odyssey. But on the whole, like, it feels very different. It feels very distinct. And I think that's just because of how they layered in the different, like, platforming segments. Because it felt like in Odyssey, each level had kind of like the critical path, and that would have, significant platforming elements. But that was basically it. If you ventured off that critical path, you're just kind of like exploring whatever. And I enjoyed that too, but it felt different to this.
Yeah, something else too, kind of on that point, in comparison to Odyssey. So I really appreciate how, if pretty much for the most part, each cat shine you collect in this game has some challenge to collect it, right? It's worth something. It feels like you're really making significant progress when you collect each of these, whereas in Odyssey with the moons, sometimes they're just out in the open or whatever.
Sit down next to a guy on the bench.
He was lonely, okay?
So I appreciate that. Yeah, I really enjoyed this game. I mean, it does have flaws or things that could be, perceived as not to a person's liking. Like Fury Bowser does come out all the time, and it could get repetitive. It never really did for me. I mean, it would happen at, frustrating points, but I was okay with him coming back, for the most part, as often as he did. But, it's a little confusing. Like, there was one time I was about to collect a cat shine, but then Fury Bowser was about to show up, and I was like, wait a minute, should I just wait so I can calm him down? So I just waited. I just stood underneath it, and then as soon as he came out, I grabbed it, and then he went away. So it's just like little stuff like that that's just a little confusing, as far as the system behind how it all works. But that kind of makes me like it all the more, because it just shows that Nintendo, they didn't really care that it was confusing. I mean, they do care, but they're willing to take that risk and try it out and see what people think of it. Take the structure of a typical 3D Mario game and kind of, flip it on its head by introducing this huge element
literally
around which the entire game is based. Literally.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You pretty much said it. I was going to say one more point in regards to that, but I think I've forgotten it. So I do want to mention this one more thing, is that as a lifelong Mario fan who's basically the same age as Mario, I'm glad that they were finally able to bring to the games what I witnessed as part of the Super Mario Super Show, where there was a whole Godzilla episode, a Koopzilla, I should say, where Koopa was storming through a city, and then Mario grew supersized as well, and for whatever reason, they had these super weird proportions, but I always wanted to do that in a game, and they finally basically accomplished it here. So even if it was a little underwhelming, I still enjoyed it. I finally got to live this, 25, 30-year-old dream I've had, so...
Yep.
I have one little thing to mention. I meant to bring it up earlier when we talked about the music. We have metal in Mario now. Mario's gone through a lot of genres, but when Fury Bowser's out, there are like metal growls and vocals that I only notice when actually listening to it. Like it might be easy to miss them, but like Mario Bowser, okay.
You know what's funny?
That's cool.
Yeah.
You know what that reminds me of?
great.
I don't know if anyone
It's
else remembers
awesome.
this.
What?
It reminds me of the music from the menu of F-Zero X, where you had this like kind of like not chanting, but like someone like kind of singing these, like briefly singing these lyrics, and it sounded almost identical to the ones in Bowser's Fury. So Yeah. Anyways.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up here, or do we pretty much cover it all?
Bowser's Fury 2, when?
Exactly.
Right. Except maybe you play as
Also,
Bowser.
Yes.
ooh. Also, no spoilers, but I love the final boss and that whole sequence. It is so off the walls and unexpected. What happens? It's good.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Really
I agree. Yeah, the whole
super fun.
The whole ending and the final boss ending, I think, were a lot of fun. I thought they did some really kind of cute things there at points. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for our Bowser's Fury discussion. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this discussion, consider clicking on the videos on the right, which are probably Bowser Fury related. So check those out. And of course, stay tuned to Game Explain for even more on Bowser's Fury in the near future, plus everything else gaming as well. We'll catch you later. Bye, everyone.